Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 10 of the On Deck podcast. I'm your host, Roberto, and today we're going to be talking about the Tokyo Games. What are some of my thoughts on that, where I think the next version of the Tokyo Games should be held, and then some interesting matchups for opening day that I'm going to have my eyes on. And then finishing up, we have the Cleveland Guardians and Colorado Rockies trade. All that on today's episode. So jumping right into the Tokyo Games, which was held at a very, very early morning for the people here on the East Coast. It was a 6 a.m. game, and for the first 4 or 5 innings, it was quite honestly a pitching duel between Yamamoto going for the Dodgers, and then we had Shota Imanaga going for the Cubs. A little cool fact about these two pitchers that I heard is they're actually from around the Tokyo area, give or take a 30-minute drive. So most likely they had, some fans, friends and family there at the game, which I think is pretty cool. And honestly, from what I saw on social media, pictures and videos, the atmosphere there was absolutely electric. And that is one thing that I think Japan has over North America, is that their baseball and their love for baseball compares to nothing else. They definitely love the game more over there than we do over here. But moving back into the game, Yamamoto and Imanaga came out, and Shota wasn't as sharp as we usually expect him to be. He had 4 walks through 4 innings, and those 4 walks were a career high for him. But the Cubs opened up the scoring in the second inning on a Miguel Amaya double, scoring Dansby Swanson. And I was surprised, out of everybody in this Cubs lineup, that he was the one to drive in their only run. And in this lineup, you forget, we have guys like Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, the newly acquired Kyle Tucker. We have Michael Busch, who had a great season for them last year. And then we have intriguing guys like Matt Shaw and PCA in that lineup. But nope, it was a Miguel Amaya to drive in that run for the Cubs. But in those 5 innings of Yamamoto's work, he did rack up 3 Ks, and the Dodgers did get him some run support, scoring in the 5th inning. And this was off of a Ben Brown meltdown. And this comes off the heels of Imanaga only going 4 innings. And to some people's surprise, they kept his pitch count under 80 pitches. And usually after a spring training start, you kind of get built up. But the plan was apparently to have him under 80. And Craig Counsell, manager of the Cubs, decided to give him the 4 innings at 70 pitches. And this led to the Ben Brown meltdown, where he gave up a bunch of walks. His final line on the game was 2 2/3 innings pitched, 4 hits, 3 runs, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts, which I guess can be one of the positive things that you take away from this game, is that he was striking guys out. But this was supposed to be the piggyback guy off of Imanaga, give him some length out of that bullpen. But you could also see him in a swingman role come the season. He did start a couple games for them in the regular season last year, but I think he can be a crucial part of that bullpen that I think is a little thin, unfortunately, for the Cubs this year. But in other words, Ben Brown just didn't have it tonight. But on the other side, the Dodgers showcased a little bit of what their bullpen could look like after Yamamoto gave them 5 solid innings. They had brought in Anthony Banda, who had been picked up from the Dodgers last season, but really before that had bounced around the league and wasn't a really good reliever. But again, like the Dodgers do with everybody, a couple tweaks here and there, and he really became a more dependable arm in the second half of the season. And even going into the postseason for him, he was good. But after Anthony Banda had given them an inning, they handed the ball over to Ben Kasparius. And this was another guy that never really was talked about until got up to the major league team with the Dodgers. Still solid for them. Then gave the ball over to Blake Trinan, and That might be one of my favorite bullpen arms just because of the movement on his pitches, especially that sinker sweeper combo. It goes two completely different ways at two crazy velos, but he's definitely one of my favorite watches of bullpen arms. And then we had Tanner Scott, who closed out the game, and he looked quite honestly pretty unhittable. This Dodgers rotation, is going to be banged up, and same thing with their bullpen. But I think with the guys that they're missing, such as Evan Phillips, Michael Kopech, and Brusdar Graterol, these are all guys that are able to compete and contribute at a high level. Like Kopech last year when he was traded from the White Sox over to the Dodgers, he was basically the best reliever in baseball come the second half. And then you add guys like Tanner Scott, Kirby Yates to this bullpen. I think once everyone is healthy and competing again in, say, mid-May and even August, this could be rivaling the Cleveland Guardians as one of the better bullpens in the major leagues. And now in the second game of this two-game series, we have Roki Sasaki making his major league debut. And it wasn't as good as we hoped it would be. I think this start had really shown some of his flaws as a pitcher and where opposing teams are going to be able to attack him. Because from what I saw, he didn't have much control of the fastball. And if he's not controlling the fastball, he quickly becomes into a very one-dimensional player. Because with his fastball, splitter, and occasional slider combo, if he is not having control or command of the fastball, his splitter becomes non-existent, because with that fastball command, he throws it low in the zone, and then that splitter plays off of that low fastball very well. And if he's not throwing strikes with the fastball, there's not going to be counts where you can throw that splitter. And his slider is a work in progress. It's not something that I saw him landing at a consistent basis. He also didn't throw very many of them, so he's primarily a fastball and splitter pitcher. And I think this is where he can run into trouble when he faces better hitting teams. But with that being said, he is also 23. He's, learning how to throw with the Major League Baseball, which is different than the MPB ball. But I think the Dodgers can really work with him and kind of refine his windup where he can throw consistent strikes with that fastball and have command of it, but also have a little more confidence with that slider so he can become more of a three-pitch pitcher and not be so dependent on the fastball and splitter. But in this game, it was pretty cool for him to get his first major league strikeout against fellow countryman Seiya Suzuki. So that's a pretty cool moment that'll definitely be a moment for him to remember. Another moment in this game was Ohtani hitting a home run, which I saw a couple people saying that it could have been also fan interference, but they did count it as a home run. But anyways, it is what it is. Of course, Ohtani goes deep, and of course the first home run is hit by him in Tokyo. But getting back to more of the game and the pitching side, both teams used a lot of pitchers. With Sasaki only going 3 innings, he was followed up by Luis Garcia. We also had guys like Jack Dreyer, Landon Knack, Kirby Yates, and Alex Vesia came in for the save. But that's a lot of pitching to use. And on the Cubs side, we had Steele go 4 innings, gave up 5 earned, did strike out 5 and gave up 2 home runs, but not a very solid start for his season. But after him, we had Nate Pearson, Caleb Theobar, we had Julian Merriweather, Porter Hodge, and then newly acquired Alex Presley come in. Didn't look great, gave up 3 walks in an inning. But again, this is a lot of pitching. But at the same time, they did only have these 2 games and then flew back to America for a couple more spring training games before getting ready for opening day, which is very, very fast approaching, and I couldn't be more excited. But some of my overall takeaways from these 2 games is that the Dodgers, who were even without Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts in these two games, might I add. They did look like the Dodgers. They just looked really good overall. Starting pitching, I think early in the season they may go to a 6-man rotation just to keep everybody healthy. With also Yamamoto and Sasaki in that lineup. They're also not used to pitching in a 5-day rotation. That's something that they've never done in Japan, so I think the Dodgers will be very cautious with their pitching, as well as seems to me like everybody gets hurt in that rotation at some point during the season, and also be waiting for Ohtani to make his comeback to the mound, and I think it was reported to be in sometime in May. But on the Cubs side, I think this lineup is actually really intriguing, with guys up and down the lineup that can give you some solid production. Although we're not expecting too much from a Pete Crow Armstrong, he is more of a defensive player, but I think this year he can really take a step forward in the offensive department and be, maybe a 90 to 95 OPS plus, but also giving you that Gold Glove defense out there in center field. But this lineup, I think, could make some noise. I like Matt Shaw at third base as well, and obviously them adding Kyle Tucker, one of the top 10 players in the MLB, in my opinion, when healthy. But I really have questions about the pitching and the staff there, because I do think that they have a lot of lefties in the starting rotation, which some people could look at it as a benefit, some people could look at it as a negative, but I see it not really benefiting them because they all kind of pitch the same with the same velocity, give or take. And outside of Jameson Taillon, which he did have a really solid season for them last year, can he repeat that? That's a question mark there. But this bullpen is a bunch of guys that you don't really have like a set closer. I know that they acquired Ryan Presley to be their closer, but he also didn't look sharp in his one inning, giving up 3 walks. He's also getting up there in age, and can he be able to produce like he did a couple years ago for the Astros? Or is it going to be more like a closing by committee where you have a bunch of guys just swapping in and out of that closer role? I think that's an interesting storyline to follow throughout the season for the Cubs, because I think a bullpen could really be the make or break for this team. But with the Tokyo games being over now, that's kind of got me thinking, where do they play next year if they were to expand these 2 games outside of Tokyo, for instance? And I think one of the main ones that came to my mind, and also I saw a lot on social media as well, was playing in the Dominican Republic. And I think this would be an absolutely electric atmosphere. I don't think they would rival the atmosphere that they do have there out in Japan, but watching some of these Winter League highlights and just seeing how crazy and rowdy those fans get after home runs or important strikeouts and big moments, I think that would be great for the game. And honestly, great for expanding the game of baseball as well, because a lot of MLB players are coming from the Dominican Republic, and some of them aren't growing up in the best of living conditions. And, you can really change a kid's outlook on baseball by being able to bring him to the field where some of his favorite players or players that grew up in his hometown are coming to play and have just that baseball atmosphere on a major league level right in front of him. I think that'd be something cool to look into for next year, really expanding it outside of Tokyo and hopefully in the Dominican Republic. And, hopefully as the years go by, they have more and more of these, because I do think it does help expand the game of baseball and bringing it to countries where some people aren't able to really get that full experience of being able to come to America, pay to watch games, because that's another thing. Games are expensive to watch nowadays. So being able to have them in your home country, get that atmosphere, and really showcase the game to a broader horizon, I think that can only benefit the game and we see the game grow globally, which I easily think that the MLB can do. But moving on, I'm going to talk about some opening day starts and some guys that I'm really interested to watch this season. And right off the bat, I'm looking at the New York Mets and Houston Astros, and it's because of Clay Holmes. I'm interested to see how he transitions to being a starter full time, and with him going up against Framber Valdez, I think that's just a great matchup of a guy that's already been established as one of the better pitchers in the MLB, and someone that has been a good reliever. As a Yankees fan, I can't be a little biased. He gave me, a fair amount of heart attacks during the season, but he's looked really good in spring training, transitioning into a starter. So that's definitely a game I'll be, watching closely. Another one is the San Francisco Giants and Cincinnati Reds, Logan Webb versus Hunter Green. Again, Webb is a guy that he's been solid throughout his whole career, kind of like the Framber Valdez, where you know what you're going to get. You're going to get an innings eater at mid to low threes and just be there every single fifth day for you. And Hunter Green really showed up last year in the second half, looked really good. I think he can build upon that for this season. And that Cincinnati Reds team is looking a little better than last year and could really make some noise in that Central Division where really it's up for grabs. Another game I'll be tuning into and watching closely is Boston versus Texas. We have Garrett Crochet, who came from the White Sox in the offseason, is a top 10 pitcher in the MLB right now, against Nathan Eovaldi, who's been, as again, like Framber, like Logan Webb, as solid as they come. Very solid for the Rangers last year. And I think Crochet, call me crazy, but I think he might win the AL Cy Young with Garrett Cole going down, and there being some question marks with some guys' health. I think this might be the year we see Garrett Crochet get his first Cy Young. But honestly, the game that I personally will be watching, is this Miami and Pittsburgh game. I know the offenses aren't the greatest in the league, but this pitching matchup is going to be absolutely electric. For Pittsburgh, we have the best pitcher in baseball. There's no doubt in my eyes that he is the best. We have Paul Skeens, and going for Miami, we have, coming back from Tommy John, Sandy Alcantara. And I think this might be a 1-0 game, honestly, because these guys are I think they're gonna absolutely duel it out. And I'm absolutely ecstatic that Sandy is back. And even in spring training, this guy's throwing 100 again, like he didn't have Tommy John at all. I think if the Marlins don't put an innings limit and don't trade him, I think we can see him get right back to that 190 innings limit. But I have a feeling that they're going to limit him to maybe around 150, 160. But that's also if they don't trade him too, which could also be an interesting storyline to follow in the world of the Marlins. But my eyes, Skeens is must-watch TV anytime he's on the mound, because with even last year, he was absolutely dominant in his short stint in the MLB. But with a full season under his belt, I'm willing to place a very large amount of money that Skeens is going to walk away with that Cy Young. Because with him adding 2 pitches and that cutter in his starts in spring training is looking like a lefty neutralizer. So I think he's going to breeze through lineups really quickly. And he's also a guy that holds his stamina very well. Like, I remember watching a start that he had last year, and then on his 100th pitch, he literally threw it 102. Like, you just don't see that. You never see guys emptying the tank like that. And honestly, I just think he's going to go out there, be a dog for Pittsburgh. He's going to be, one of the few bright spots on their pitching staff. I think the pitching staff has a lot of potential, especially if they call up a guy like Bubba Chandler, which I had previously talked about in the Spring Breakout podcast. But yeah, this is definitely the game that I'll be watching. This is going to be a great matchup, and will end in a very, very low scoring game with a bunch of strikeouts in my mind. But closing it out here, we have an interesting trade with the Colorado Rockies and Cleveland Guardians. And that trade sent Nolan Jones back to Cleveland. And in return, the Rockies got utility man Tyler Friedman back. But this is an interesting trade for the Guardians, as they actually traded away Nolan Jones back in 2022 for Juan Brito. And this is an interesting move because now looking at the Guardians outfield, you have obviously Steven Kwan in left, you have Lane Thomas in center, and then a combination of Will Brennan and Jhonkensy Noel in right field. And although Nolan Jones has played other games at first base and third base, he's primarily been an outfielder. And so the question is, where do you put him? You could think about putting him at first base, but you have guys like Carlos Santana and Kyle Manzardo locking up those positions. And I think when Manzardo is playing first, you could see a DH of either Will Brennan or Jhonkensy Noel or even Carlos Santana based on the handedness of the pitcher. So this trade was very interesting because Nolan Jones also doesn't have any minor league options left. So he's going to either have to play on the major league roster or they're going to find a trade partner for them. So interesting move by the Guardians. I feel like they're going to find a way to make this work because it's the Guardians. They always find a way to get the best out of their players, whether that be hitting wise or pitching wise. So I'm just going to put my faith into the Guardians that they'll find a way to make it work. And Nolan Jones will be right back to where he was, like he was playing in 2023, where he quietly put up a 2020 season while almost hitting 300. But I think out there in Cleveland, where lefties do have that sort of that wind tunnel effect due to the changes that they made in the stadium in the previous offseason, I think this could be a place where Nolan Jones thrives and potentially gets back to where he was just a couple years ago before his injuries. But with that being said, that concludes today's podcast. I hope every single one of you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below some of the takeaways that you had from the Tokyo Games, and also where do you think the next version of the Tokyo Games should be held? Let me know your thoughts. But I appreciate every one of you for listening. It'd be greatly appreciated if you rate and review the podcast on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else you might find your podcast. But thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.